Now, our final guest today is Labour's Shadow Housing Secretary Steve Reid, who joins us now from South London. Thanks for being with us. We just heard from Tracy Nichols of talking about the pressure on ambulances, and it does feel that more widely, the stress the NHS is under in London is really bleak. In your constituency in Croydon, it's estimated 1 in 20 people have COVID. More than half the beds at Croydon University Hospital are occupied by COVID patients. I mean, how desperate is the situation?
Well, it's very alarming. I'm in touch with our local hospital chief executive regularly to keep tabs on what's going on. They're doing their absolute best. But Sadiq Khan, as the Mayor of London, has declared a major incident now because he's concerned, as the health professionals are, that within 2 weeks we might start to exceed capacity, and that's when things get really, really difficult. So, Chris Whitty was quite right to say to people, we all have to behave now as if we have COVID, just stay at home as much as we possibly can, because the only certain way to not transmit the virus is to have no contact with other people, insofar as that's possible.
Speaking to Matt Hancock, he was pretty clear that compliance is a bit of an issue. He also said that police were right, or he backed the police when they fined 2 women driving around 5 miles to a beauty spot in Derbyshire for a walk. Do you think that the police were right to issue that fine?
Well, it's hard to comment on a particular case when I don't know all the details, but the police have done an amazing job in very difficult circumstances, and we should congratulate them for that. What the police need to do is be very proportionate and measured in their approaches. But I think the real problem here is the lack of clarity over the guidance that we've had from the government. People are simply confused about what they should or shouldn't do, and that stems right back to last summer, when Dominic Cummings, as the Prime Minister's senior advisor, got away with driving all the way up to County Durham and back again, breaching the rules and with no sanction at all. In fact, he got a pretty big pay rise after that from what I heard. Now, the government's constant chopping and changing, one rule for them, another rule for everybody else, simply confuses everybody. Even in the period in the run-up to Christmas, we had Matt Hancock standing in the chamber of the House of Commons telling us that there was a new variant of the disease spreading in Kent and parts of East London that was more contagious. 2 days after that, Boris Johnson stood up in the House of Commons and told us it was perfectly safe to ease the restrictions for 5 days over Christmas. We were all wondering whether these 2 senior Conservative politicians actually speak to each other. And of course, in the end, Boris Johnson had to pull back from that position, and we got 1 day instead of the full 5. But the chopping and changing, the inconsistency really confuses people. And given the crisis we're seeing now in our hospitals up and down the country, we need the government to really focus on getting this message crystal clear. The public need to know, the police need to know, we all need to know. Just stay at home as much as you can, and that should be what the government focuses on.
It's interesting, asking you questions about fines that are happening now, about compliance, about what the police should be doing. And while I don't want to diminish the importance of what happened with Dominic Cummings, you refer all the way back to something that happened like way back in last year. I mean, some people might think that's just playing politics.
Well, it isn't. If you speak to people, and I speak to an awful lot of people about that was the moment.
People are just using it as an excuse, though. I mean, look, we all know what we should be doing now, don't we? We should be staying at home, like you say. We should be following the rules.
Trust in what the government was saying broke. The government broke that trust, and they should be doing things to fix that broken trust. But the constant chopping and changing, I just gave the example before Christmas. Matt Hancock telling us there was a more virulent strain of the virus, more contagious, on the Monday. On the Wednesday, Boris Johnson saying that was going to have no impact on 5 days relaxation of the rules over Christmas. And then just a few days later, U-turned again. Now, if the government knew that information about the virus, and I presume Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson do speak to each other, they should have been crystal clear from then that we couldn't have 5 days relaxation over Christmas. It's consistency of message that we need, not chopping and changing.
Of course, the consistency of message is absolutely, vital here, is really important. But I do sometimes wonder, it's quite easy to criticise the government, isn't it? Does Labour need to show a bit more leadership too, about a way out, about things that should be done in the future, rather than looking back to the past? In an interview with my colleague Sam Coates this week, for example, Keir Starmer said it's inevitable that schools will have to close, and therefore they need to be part of the national restrictions package that needs to come into place. I mean, it's not really leadership to call for things that are already inevitable, is it?
Well, the thing, as you just said, Sophie, and you're absolutely right, the thing to focus on now is moving forwards. What's happened has happened. The way out of this crisis now is getting the vaccinations out across the country at pace. Now, we're pushing the government to hit the target of 2 million vaccinations a week. We have to absolutely move heaven and earth to get those vaccinations out. Now, I understand there are issues with supply of the vaccine at the moment. It would help if the government would give a daily briefing where they told us how much supply of the vaccine is available, how much of the vaccine has actually been put into people's arms and in every part of the country, so that we can scrutinise the situation and see what's going on. The second point here is the government needs to start planning now for not just hitting the 2 million a week target, but exceeding it, because we need to get this vaccine out as quickly as possible, because that is the only way that we can end this nightmare that we're in as a country at the moment. Now, we've heard this week, haven't we, from pharmacists who are trained to give injections, have not been called on to help with delivering the vaccine when it happens. I've had dentists in my constituency telling me the same thing. I've had local government leaders telling me they are offering the government buildings, spaces where vaccines can be delivered, help to manage volunteers who can go out and reach the harder to reach parts of the population. The government hasn't responded to them. You know, the government said no one will have to travel more than 10 miles to get a vaccine. Well, actually, 10 miles is a long way to go if you don't have a car. There are buildings that communities own or that councils own in every village, town, suburb of this country that could be made available. I'm standing. I can't see it because of the fog, but just behind me there's a building here that could be available for this community. Why the government needs to start planning now to get this vaccine out at pace. You know, thanks to our scientists, we were the first country in the world to get the vaccine. Let's now set ourselves the ambition to be the first country in the world to be vaccinated and move on from this crisis.
OK. Interesting that you just called for more data on vaccines that I think we're expecting from Monday. So, you know, handy that Labour's calling for something that we are expecting to see.
If they give what they've said they're going to give, you know, I hope they do give us full transparency, because in too many other cases so far they haven't.
OK. Matt Hancock said earlier as well that if you're a key worker and you possibly can keep your child at home, rather than sending them to school, so if just one of you is a key worker, for example, then that's what parents should do. Do you think that actually parents do need to be taking a bit more responsibility and only sending children into school if they need to?
Well, I think I heard what Matt Hancock said on that, and I think on that point he was right. You know, if parents, even key workers, can keep their children at home rather than sending them to school, then that is what they need to do. But we need to be absolutely clear here as well that the schools are open for the children of key workers, because we need those key workers, whether they're social workers, health workers, care workers. We need them out there doing their jobs to keep people safe. So the schools are open for the children of key workers. But if, like everybody else, if there are key workers who are able safely to work from home and they can have their children with them, then that's what they should do.
OK. And just finally, you're calling for the government to scrap a planned rise in council tax. At the same time, of course, the economy is obviously in a pretty dire situation because of COVID-19. Don't taxes need to rise?
Well, what the government said at the start of the last lockdown was that they would give whatever support councils needed to support communities to get through this crisis. Councils incurred a massive funding gap from lost revenues and the additional cost of supporting communities that the government then failed to repay them. So we're seeing councils right now in the middle of this pandemic, and while we're facing in this country the worst recession of any major economy, we're seeing councils cut services and take away the support communities need. Now, the government's way to deal with that should not be to impose a 5% council tax rise on hard-working people the day after the extended furlough scheme ends. We've lost, I think, up to 1 million people have lost their jobs since this pandemic began already. More people are at risk of losing this job their jobs when the furlough scheme ends. That is no time to impose a 5% council tax rise on the community. And one of the problems with using council tax as the way that you raise the revenue is it doesn't hit people equally. It doesn't bear any relation to, or very much relationship to the level of earnings that somebody has. And you can raise more money by a 5% council tax increase in a wealthy area than in a poorer area. But actually, we need to be giving people, wherever they are, the support that they need. So this is just an absurd thing for the government to propose doing, and I hope they'll withdraw it.
OK, thank you very much for coming on the show. It looks very chilly where you are, but very beautiful at the same time.
Chilly,
so thank
Sophie,
you for
yes.
braving the cold. Thank you.